Wonderful. Thank you very much. Now it's my honor to introduce to you Professor Ivars Austers, who is one of the authors of the study, one of those who studied the issue. So he was commissioned by the Ministry of Science to conduct this study or research, which formed the basis of the priority discussion. Good morning. Martins is away in Letonica conference in Daugavpils, so unfortunately I have to present everything alone, so we didn't have to throw a coin to decide who's going to present, it somehow got sorted out itself. So what did we do? Our objective was not to formulate the research priorities. However, we were asked to identify the most important social trends and how science can help tackle those social issues. And let me start my presentation by giving you the basic definitions that you need to understand in order to comprehend our way of thinking, the logic behind the study, and what was our rationale in terms of defining the research focus. A wonderful statement. A developed country is an innovative country. Well, if you don't agree, then you most probably shouldn't speak up. But this is what we took for granted as one of our departure points, and you would be considered a stranger if you were to disagree with this statement. But there are some basic assumptions that we nevertheless had to take into account. So first of all, the resource scarcity. There is a finite amount of funding, and there's never enough funding, and I'm actually putting now the horse before the cart, but we conducted an opinion poll, a public opinion poll, and some of you most probably took part in it. Some 628 people took part in the poll, and most probably you were among those who were selected for the opinion poll and gave you answers to the questions. So there was a group of questions about scientific challenges and what do we need to solve definite scientific challenges or research challenges. Of course, the top one answer was more money, promote education, and then we had answers like promote the reputation of science and get more foreign researchers involved. And, you might agree with it. Money is, at the core of everything. Money makes the world grow round, but we have a finite amount of money, so there is a resource constraint that you have to take into account. Then another assumption that we had to take into account, that scientific community is only one group of society that have some sort of impact or influence on the research activities. This is not a 19th century gentlemen's club who are just spending their spare money on scientific research and can just decide, whatever they want to study and whatever they are going to do with the research outcomes. So if it is the public money that gets invested in those research activities, there are other stakeholders who have the right to, claim some sort of return from those research activities. We have business community as one of the stakeholders. We have policy makers. We have the general public and society as a whole, who are not directly involved in the conducting of the research directly, and so we had to put all those assumptions together, look at all of those assumptions. You could play naive, and you could ask, research is all about asking, questions, asking naive questions, and if you don't ask naive questions, you'll not get far. So why should we even be talking about the priorities in research? And here's an example. or an answer to this. What has changed during this Olympic cycle, or this 4-year cycle? So 2 major shifts have taken place. First of all, our demographic situation has changed quite drastically. Well, it has been rather changing over a long period of time, but now everyone has become aware of the change that has happened, because there's a certain, sort of inertia or delay between, understanding and the phenomena. And then the priorities have changed. The national security is now a priority, and the individual's role in providing the national security has also become much more important. So these are 2 important shifts that we have to take into account when we are looking at the research priorities or their assessment. And then, for the introduction's sake, another important issue is the response. When you ask people, what are the priorities? Where should the research money and research work should go into? The absolute leader by large is health research. Everyone cares about health, and this is not unique for Latvia. You can, see the same thing everywhere else in the world. But if you ask them, whether freedoms, individual liberties should be researched, that's the probably sort of least favored answer. In this ranking, it's at the bottom. It's not that important for people, and you can't just, poll the people and let all the groups sort of provide their answers with the probability of having a comprehensive result and then decide on the allocations. That's why we chose a different approach. We tried to get different stakeholders involved in giving sort of professional answers to these questions.
So we asked the question. There are 2 kinds of answers possible in the survey. How developed are these sciences? Here you can see healthcare, engineering sciences, so those would be most developed. Natural sciences, close, agricultures, and humanities have less developed, unfortunately. If we follow logic like this, then what's happened? How much to develop, we receive a rather similar outcomes. So it's exactly the same hierarchy as before. And we can put that on graph. When we speak science, then we always have to have some graphs, and we have to have proofs. On the x-axis, you see how developed are the science directions, and on y-axis, it would be how important it should be to develop these specific directions of science. And then what follows is that what is developed, that should be developed further. And unless you represent natural sciences or engineering sciences, then there's discussion starts. If humanities and social sciences should have a place under the sun, if it's possible to do something with it. So we cannot really ask representatives of science. So people who are not related to science and scientists, they think alike. And similar results would also be if the same questions would be asked in different time. Exactly the same ideas, outcomes came out from a survey from 2014. So there are no rapid changes. So what do we do with all that? There is a global framework. There are several strategic development documents which we should heed and pay attention to. Those are our guidelines. We have Latvia 2030 National Development Plan. We have Smart Specialization Strategy. And then at European level, we also have some documents which we should heed. Innovation Union, Horizon program. And so we come to 3 conceptual blocks, priorities, if I can put it so. So on one hand, we have economical capital, technologies, vertical priorities. This is what we call vertical priorities, meaning how different spheres take decisions, how they move forward. Then we have social capital, which we also have to pay attention to. Horizontal priorities, how this interchange of different spheres happen. And it all happens not somewhere, I don't know, in any land of Europe. No, it happens here in Latvia. And this is why we also have this cultural capital. We have to take into account national identity, principles, we have our values. And this is what we could call horizontal priorities, something which should go through the priorities mentioned before. So where did we get our data? Questions about data, about methodology, that's a very important question. And here you can see listed our sources. First of all, we had our strategic development documents. I already mentioned some. Then we had the data of a survey 2014 DNB Latvia Barometer survey of Latvian population. And there was also a survey of residents in respect to this. Our survey in this specific case is our survey. I assume most of you have filled in. So in total there were 621 respondents. We had discussions in our focus groups, and in these focus groups discussions there were representatives of different groups. So first of all, we are interested in research-intensive enterprises. What's their opinion? The creative industries. These creative industries are usually, everyone wants to get them aboard. So it's innovative capital, what they can contribute, also cultural values, startups, and representatives of professional associations. So those are the people we talked to. We also made a survey of scientific institutions. So these institutions which are in this registry of scientific institutions, and there was a relatively short survey they were asked to fill in. We didn't get answers 100%, but most of institutions answered, and some of them were more active, some were less active. And then we also we held interviews with scientists, and we chose representatives of natural sciences, humanities, and engineers and others. And sometimes it's difficult to say to which specific science field the scientist belongs. So anyhow, so what it comes to, when we put all data together, we found out, and I'm going to list those areas which we found out to be important. These are not priorities, so these are areas where, based on sources of information I just listed, so all those groups, so scientists could contribute. And there's consensus between scientists on one hand, society on the other hand, and this also corresponds to strategic planning documents. It's not coming out of the blue. This is like it's stemming from these sources. Everyone speaks on these areas, and this is what we found out. So, first, ICT, cybersecurity, and smart materials. And this is how we positioned this area. Obviously, ICT, smart materials, this is not the first time they're mentioned. People are talking this a lot, and also this also was not something new. But what came new, it was a topic of cybersecurity. Two groups speak about this and point out that this. In the surveys there were not many questions, and we also allowed answers in free format, but it didn't happen often. So basically, who were the people who brought this up? So that was representatives of scientific institutions. So that was their opinion. What should researchers do? And what's perhaps even more important, that these topics were not looked upon isolated, not as technical solutions. Rather, everyone we talked to said that this is an area where possibilities of different science fields come together: engineering, natural sciences, social, humanities. So who have something to say on this specific topic? Also, medicine and healthcare institutions and scientific institutions mentioned and brought up this area as something they can contribute to. So this ICT, cybersecurity, and next, energy independence and energy efficiency. The topic how to diversify our primary energy resources, how to increase the share of renewable energy resources. This is also not a new topic. It's something which been discussed a lot. But how scientists see this area and how the public sees this topic overall, this is present, this is important. Especially in interviews with scientists, what was stressed was there should not be interdisciplinarity. President, I spoke to one of the leading Latvian natural scientists, and he said, how can we know what to do? We need some framework of values, and then social and humanities can help us in order to take decisions about research as well as to setting our priorities. Just saying that we have to study energy efficiency or energy independence, then we would go in a very specific topic, which of course is important per se, but there's also a topic what others would learn. So this is a rather free citation from this structured discussion. Next one would be area demography and public health. Perhaps I'm going to repeat myself, but that is something that came up as an important area for Latvian science. And this area came up over the last few years. I want to draw your attention to several topics. Something new which we did not pay attention to. It's related to job automation, artificial intelligence, something scientists speak about, planning documents, refer to. Perhaps representatives of society do not bring up it so much, but yes, this is another area which was mentioned, and some contradictions are present. Want we it or do not want? This is going to come to the front seat, and this is going to be discussed. Everyone understand that public health topics are important, in particular the quality of healthcare, how to improve it. Next would be innovations for Latvian healthcare. It's diagnostics, it's availability of medical care. Smart diagnostic instruments are also belong to this area, and we set them apart But what we want to write here in that this interdisciplinarity is important. It's not something that we just wrote that in, but it's something how to move forward and how scientific institutions and scientists individually think about these topics. Next area would be social protection, equality, and security. So this social traps, something that we should think, like topics of poverty, unemployment, addictions of all sorts. And then also there are people with disabilities. And there's a question how these people can be competitive in the labor market, how employers see them, how they can, how families can help these people, what's the attitude of society in general towards these people. And then, of course, there are segments of society which were brought up, the segments which are not paid enough attention so far, like, for example, young offenders, former convicts, prisoners. Then there's domestic violence, and then some violators of law. So these are the segments of society which are not researched so much, perhaps. And the next area would be educational research. Research on education quality. We talk a lot how to improve quality of education. And then the support of science is important. Evaluation of educational quality, monitoring of it, instruments available, tool set available, analysis of results, suggestions, working out suggestions and proposals for improvement, development of indicators and scientific-based instruments to understand if we follow the right path, innovations for teaching methods, different internet systems, but what's perhaps even more important is that in addition to what I mentioned, brought up already, there's also this critical thinking. Critical thinking is something which now, perhaps under influence of political situation, is something new.
So therefore scientists must think about studies, education studies. So one of such would be media literacy or the critical thinking in general. And then, there's another sort of research segment, the research into Latvian identity and values behind the identity, the language, history, and cultural heritage. So the conclusion or the main sort of finding here is that in future, only those countries that are able to preserve their unique identity will be able to be, more competitive globally compared to other countries. So that said, identity, language, cultural values, history, traditional way of living or folk, wisdom, and the links with other cultures will be an emerging priority, and inclusive national identity is something which also should be researched. So this is about the securitability of Latvian nation. So security and securitability, is a sort of cross-cutting issue, as you can see, which sort of goes beyond one research area. So we are talking about people living fulfilling lives, achieving their desires, targets, and dreams, because what we hear people often saying is that, I can't, use my potential fully, and so on and so forth. So research should be done in order to help people tap into their untapped potential. Use their talents. So now, to sum it up, what we have to think is not about, we have to focus not only on projects that are easy from a transfer point of view, because as you know, you just saw, those research areas are not going to give you immediate return, financial or monetary return. These are rather greater social challenges that we need to solve that cannot be transferred easily to industry, and these are the major areas that we have sort of single out of this research. And then in these areas you can also find the projects that can be transferred to industry. We had wonderful exchange of views with industry representatives and startup community who are very sensitive to social change and are always looking for opportunities to profit. And this is in a nutshell what they said. They said we need people who feel safe, who are creative, talented, not afraid to unleash their talents, and that is the only way how to make, these intangible values or intangible benefits into an economic ones, and how to transform it, or transfer it to GDP growth, or translate it into GDP growth. So that is something that we concluded. That's all for me. Thank you. Thank you, Ivars, for the very detailed and comprehensive study and summary.